They say karma always catches up in the end, but when it comes to the Kim family, history's longest-running dictatorship masquerading as a monarchy, you start to wonder whether karma just stopped at the border and said, "Nah, I'm not doing this one." Imagine this. An entire country turned into one giant prison camp. Children starving while the leadership sips French cognac. Executions by anti-aircraft gun. And international assassinations pulled off like they're still auditioning for a James Bond villain role. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of the Kim Dynasty of North Korea. The most dangerous family in the world, running a mafia state wrapped in communist cosplay for nearly 80 years. Our story begins in 1945. The Soviet Union, victorious in the ashes of World War II, carved up Korea like an afterthought. They needed a man who could run their new puppet state in the north. Obedient, but brutal. Enter Kim Il-sung, a minor guerrilla fighter. Stalin looked at him and thought, close enough. And so a dynasty was born, though Marx probably did not have hereditary communist monarchy in mind when he scribbled out Das Kapital. Kim Il-sung engineered something new, not just dictatorship, but hereditary dictatorship. North Korea didn't just get a dear leader, they got a permanent job opening for supreme ruler, written directly into the family DNA, and to make sure nobody ever forgot, he wove the ideology of self-reliance, which really meant, rely on us the Kims for everything, your food, your freedom, even your thoughts. But wait, it gets worse. To organize the people, Kim invented the infamous songbun caste system. Picture Hogwarts houses, but instead of Gryffindor and Slytherin, you're either loyal or permanently screwed. If your grandfather sneezed during the wrong speech in the 1950s, congratulations. Your entire bloodline is now condemned for generations. Guilt became hereditary, like debt passed down with interest. By the 1950s and 60s, Il-sung was tightening his grip by introducing a little hobby of his own, mass purges. The 1956 August faction incident wiped out hundreds of rivals. Then came sham trials, public executions, and whole families erased because someone looked suspiciously intellectual. Stalin killed in private. Kim Il-sung did it with fanfare. He also built a network of gulags and prison camps, which basically doubled as execution pipelines. More than 200,000 North Koreans were locked into these hellholes, often for crimes like listening to foreign radio or forgetting to dust his portrait. Yes, dust. Failure to clean your dear leader's face could get 3 generations of your family sent to a prison mine. People were forced to bow to his image morning, noon, and night. Worship wasn't optional, it was oxygen. And the people learned quickly. If Il-sung wasn't God, he was at least border God with shoot-to-kill policies. By the 1970s, he had perfected the blend of paranoia, narcissism, and divine cosplay. Citizens were taught that his birth had changed the seasons. Textbooks claimed he commanded the sun to shine. Every meal, every prayer, every routine revolved around his portrait. And when he finally died in 1994, they didn't just bury him, they made him D's eternal president, as in written into the Constitution. Death itself was treated as an administrative hiccup. But before we skip ahead, let's pause. The Kim dynasty isn't just tragic, it's absurd. It's the political equivalent of Monty Python written in blood. You know it's bad when a country forces citizens to request government permission for their haircut, and only 15 hairstyles are approved. That's how you know your government has too much time on its hands. When Kim Il-sung finally kicked the bucket in '94, the world hoped maybe North Korea might loosen up. Cue laugh track. Enter Kim Jong-il, the dear leader. If his dad was Stalin's knockoff, Jong-il was the Walmart brand James Bond villain. He expanded the terror, but also added buffoonery. 20,000 pirated Hollywood DVDs, imported Hennessy worth hundreds of thousands per year, and enough kidnapped talent to start his own twisted Netflix originals department. While North Korea starved, Jong-il lived in luxury, and starved it did. From 1994 to 1998, the so-called arduous march. Famine ripped through the country. Euphemism of the century. What it really meant, 1 million people dead from starvation. Families boiling bark to eat, children collapsing in marketplaces, reports of cannibalism in rural provinces, and if you got caught stealing food, execution. One man was shot in front of hundreds for taking grass to eat. Grass. Meanwhile, Jong-il was downing lobster and champagne flown in from Paris. It wasn't bad governance, it was weaponized famine. He fed the military, he fed the elites, everyone else became expendable, and the hypocrisy? Off the charts. This man pirated Western films like a maniac, collecting Rambo, James Bond, and even Godzilla tapes, even kidnapping a famous South Korean director, Shin Sang-ok, to make propaganda flicks. Imagine being forced to remake Godzilla films, except this time the monster is American imperialism, and your producer is Kim Jong-il, holding you hostage. Jong-il also expanded the state's criminal empire through Room 39, which ran counterfeit currency factories, heroin smuggling, weapons deals, and meth labs. Entire economy, mafia operation with nukes, and the profits funded grotesque luxuries, palaces, zoos, armored trains stocked with French Bordeaux. Meanwhile, average North Koreans earned pennies, if they survived at all. At least Scarface pretended to be a businessman. Kim Jong-il ran an actual nation like a cartel ledger. By the time Jong-il died in 2011, the world was already exhausted by North Korea. Then came his pudgy, Swiss-educated son, Kim Jong-un. He arrived young, underestimated, with a goofy haircut that went viral. But anyone who laughed quickly realized mockery in North Korea can get you vaporized. Literally. Uncle Jang Song-thak, executed by anti-aircraft gun. A defense minister, shot for nodding off during one of Kim's speeches. His half-brother Kim Jong-nam, assassinated in Malaysia. Airport with VX nerve agent, one of the most toxic substances ever created, smeared on his face by two women tricked into thinking it was a prank show. He died in minutes. Kim Jong-un wanted the world to know. He wasn't weak. He was as lethal as his father and grandfather combined. And let's face it, the man went all in on the Bond villain aesthetic. Nuclear missile launches, cybercrime syndicates that hacked international banks and stole $400 million in crypto in 1 year. Luxury yachts, private ski resorts, drunken imported Swiss cheese parties. Meanwhile, nearly half his country lacked access to safe drinking water. But here's the truly terrifying part. Despite famine, despite executions, despite sanctions, despite the whole world knowing everything about their cruelty, the Kim dynasty endures. Why? Because they turned suffering into a system. Mass surveillance, neighbors spying on neighbors. Informant networks where children report their parents. A caste system locking millions into hereditary slavery. Prison camps with a 25% annual death rate. And propaganda so ridiculous it almost works. Citizens still learn Kim Jong-il invented the hamburger. They genuinely claim the leaders don't defecate because they're too pure. In a sense, the only thing North Korea exports successfully is insanity. The Kims have mastered the one trick other dictators never figured out. Controlling not just what you do, but what you believe to be real. Kim Jong-un doesn't just want obedience, he wants worship. And the entire nation has been trained to deliver it. But maybe, just maybe, cracks show. History tells us every dynasty falls eventually. The Romanovs ended in a bloody basement. The Borgias were undone by their own poison. The Habsburgs bred themselves into genetic collapse. Could the Kims, the self-crowned eternal dynasty, one day meet karma face to face? For now, the statues stand tall. The prison camps stay full. The people bow to portraits because not bowing means death. And the family that starved millions still lives in royal palaces. History's longest-running practical joke. Only the punchline has been swallowed by 25 million terrified souls. Turns out, when you run the world's most dangerous family business, death isn't a tragedy. It's policy. And here is the part they really don't advertise in the Visit Pyongyang brochures. Under the Kim dynasty, death doesn't always come by bullet or starvation. Sometimes it comes by absurdity. Imagine living under a government that dictates not just your job or your loyalty, but even your haircut. 15 government-approved hairstyles. Pick one or risk the gulag. Want to try a mullet? Congratulations. You've just committed high treason against the eternal leader's sense of style. But let's rewind. How exactly has this family managed to hold on for 3 generations when most dictatorships crumble within a decade? Answer: by weaponizing every possible lever: fear, hunger, loyalty, money, crime, and spectacle. Take famine, for example. During the 1990s arduous march, people weren't just dying of starvation, they were publicly executed if caught stealing food. Guards banned people from picking corn kernels dropped during harvest. Whole villages became ghost towns, bodies sprawled in marketplaces with no one left to bury them. International aid trickled in, but the Kims funneled it to the military. The regime survived, the people didn't. And all the while, Kim Jong-il's personal alcohol tab hit $30 million a year. If irony could kill, this dynasty would have been wiped out decades ago. But famine wasn't just negligence, it was a control mechanism. When your people are too hungry to rebel, your throne gets a little sturdier. When they're too malnourished to march, your parades of loyalty look like obedience instead of desperation. Fear by famine, a strategy almost elegant in its monstrosity. And then there's the money game. Forget balancing budgets or running trade networks. North Korea perfected the art of state-sponsored crime. Enter Room 39, the Kim family's private bank. Forget savings accounts. This was a shadow empire pulling in billions each year through counterfeiting, weapons trafficking, drug production, and slave labor exports. The counterfeit money was so good, it legitimately spooked US Treasury officials. The so-called super notes were near-perfect replicas of 100 bills, flooding global markets in the 90s and 2000s. Imagine being a dictatorship so broke, you decide to just print another country's currency and succeed at it. If Banksy ever turned into a mafia boss, this is how he'd run a state. But petty theft wasn't enough for the Kims. Methamphetamine production became state policy. Government labs manufactured meth, exported via smugglers worldwide. Imagine if the DEA raided a Breaking Bad lab, only to realize it was being run by a whole government. North Korea turned international drug traffic into a ministry portfolio. And they didn't stop there. Weapons sales to Syria, Iran, Myanmar, even terrorist groups. Basically, if you had cash and a bloodthirsty agenda, North Korea was your one-stop shop for missiles and narcotics. And when global sanctions tightened, the regime shrugged and decided to try hacking instead. Enter the Lazarus Group, their state-sponsored team of cyber criminals. These weren't basement teenagers. These were government-trained hackers running billion-dollar heists. In 2022 alone, they stole $400 million in cryptocurrency. A country where only 0.1% of the population can access the internet also runs one of the most feared cybercrime syndicates in the world. Orwell's ghost is somewhere screaming, "I told you, idiots." But it wasn't just crime abroad. At home, the Kims tightened control with Orwellian precision. They built a society where neighbor spies on neighbor, where even children are taught to rat out their parents. Weekly self-criticism sessions forced citizens to confess disloyal thoughts. Imagine group therapy, except instead of working through your childhood trauma, you're admitting you didn't cheer hard enough for Kim Jong-il's last speech, miss enough enthusiasm points, and you disappear into a gulag. And about those gulags, these aren't your average prisons. They're vast slave labor camps, where up to 120,000 political prisoners rot away in perpetual misery. Mortality rates hover around 25% annually. Entire families are imprisoned under the doctrine of 3 generations of punishment. If one man tries to escape, his parents and children are punished equally. Imagine being born guilty, sentenced to a labor camp because your grandfather mouthed off in 1956. North Korea isn't T. Orwell-S 1984. It S. Orwell-S rejected rough draft. Rejected because it seemed too unrealistic. Executions also became theatre. Public executions by firing squad, by hanging, even by mortar rounds and anti-aircraft guns. Yes, anti-aircraft guns. Picture lining up a man against a gun normally used to blow planes out of the sky, then watching him literally disintegrate under firepower designed for 2-ton machinery. Call it overkill, call it shock value, but honestly, it's terror performance art. Kim Jong especially has turned executions into symbolic annihilations. Blink during his speeches and your punishment might double as a fireworks show. Then there's the sexual exploitation. The Kims ran not only gulags and armies, but also organized sexual servitude. The sinister pleasure brigades recruited girls as young as 13 to serve officials. Women in prison camps were subjected to systematic rape, forced abortions, sterilizations. All of this in a country that simultaneously screams about revolutionary purity. Behind closed palace doors, purity turned into depravity. But even cultural life wasn't safe. The Kims weaponized art itself. The infamous mass games involved tens of thousands of performers turned into human pixels, giant stadium mosaics glorifying the dynasty. Imagine training from childhood to flip-colored placards for hours, just to turn your body into a propaganda slideshow about a man who claims he doesn't poop. That's North Korean culture. Citizens forced to fake joy under threat of prison. State art studios churned out propaganda statues by the tens of thousands, even exporting them abroad for hard cash. Pyongyang film studios? Yes, those existed. Kim Jong-il was such a movie buff, he literally kidnapped South Korean director Shin Sang-ok and his actress wife to make movies. Imagine being abducted and handed a script where the villain is America, the hero is Kim Jong-il, and the distribution plan is no one's allowed to not watch it. Even sports didn't escape absurdity. North Korea built the biggest stadium in the world while its citizens starved. 150,000 seats, mostly filled with terrified citizens told to perform enthusiasm or else. Nothing says workers' paradise like unpaid slaves cheering for sports they done to play in a stadium larger than any capitalist democracy bothered to build. Layer all of this with propaganda so bizarre it borders on parody. Kim Jong-il invented the hamburger. Kim Il-sung's birth changed the seasons. Kim Jong-un learned to drive at age 3, and state news claiming the leaders never defecate because they're too holy to produce waste. Somewhere, Monty Python is suing for copyright. Yet despite famine, torture, absurdity, executions, sexual slavery, and international crime, the Kims have endured for 3 generations. And they've done it not through brilliance, but through brute force, total information control, and sheer audacity. The family lives in palaces with indoor ski lifts, armored personal trains stocked with imported Bordeaux, yachts bigger than the fishing fleets their citizens starve on. Kim Jong-un alone controls a personal $4 billion slush fund, while his people earn an average of $1,200 annually. He spends $30 million a year on alcohol, while 41% of his citizens lack safe drinking water. His private zoo gets more budget than the country's hospitals. Versailles looks subtle compared to Pyongyang. It's a grotesque contrast, a billionaire monarchy presiding over skeletons, enslaving its own bloodline, and daring the world to look away. That contrast is the Kim Dynasty's entire existence, radiating untouchable luxury in a kingdom of fear so intense people dust portraits to avoid prison. Fear, absurdity, and annihilation, all in a dynastic family package. Now, executions at home weren't enough. The Kim dynasty had another trick up its sleeve: assassination abroad. Because when you're a family hell-bent on surviving at all costs, family members themselves aren't even safe. Take Kim Jong-nam, half-brother to Kim Jong-un. He was supposed to be an heir until he made the mistake of favoring reform and maybe a Disney trip or 2. That earned him exile, and eventually a hit order. In 2017, at Malaysia's Kuala Lumpur International Airport, 2 women approached him casually. They rubbed their hands on his face like it was some cheap prank show. Minutes later, he staggered towards security, begging for help. Within 20 minutes, he was dead. The weapon? VX nerve agent, an odorless, colorless chemical so lethal it's classified as a weapon of mass destruction. One touch on your skin and your nervous system fries. And Kim Jong-nam knew the danger. He was carrying the antidote with him, just not enough to save him. The women later explained they thought they were participating in a hidden camera prank, a prank show. Imagine being tricked into global assassination for less than $100. This wasn't amateur theater. This was state-sponsored murder art, choreographed by North Korean agents and carried out in broad daylight. But Jong-nam wasn't just a disgruntled royal. Later reports revealed he had been a CIA contact. Killing him wasn't just family politics. It was sending a message to rival powers. We can kill anywhere, anytime, and we're not afraid of your borders. This wasn't new either. Uncle Jang Song-thaek was executed in 2013 by anti-aircraft gun for treachery. Basically, he wasn't enthusiastic enough about Kim Jong-un's rule. One defense minister was executed for dozing off during a speech. Imagine that. Nodding off in a boring monologue, and the next day, your anti-aircraft target practice in front of your peers. That's the threat. Don't just clap for the supreme leader. Clap with energy or you'll be reduced to dust particles. Executions became performance art. Assassinations became foreign policy. In North Korea, murder isn't just punishment, it's branding. And speaking of branding, nothing sells quite like nukes. Kim Jong-un knew the world viewed him as a joke when he first came to power. A Swiss-schooled chubby millennial with a bad haircut. But nothing says, take me seriously, like nuclear fire. By ramping up the testing of nukes and long-range ballistic missiles, North Korea forced world leaders to sit across the table from him. He turned global ridicule into unwanted respect. Donald Trump went from calling him Rocket Man to literally shaking his hand on TV. In dictator marketing, that's as good as brand rehabilitation gets. But here is the nightmare. Every dollar spent on nuclear tests was food not spent on citizens. Entire agricultural imports could have been bought with the billions North Korea sank into its nuclear program. Instead, people scavenged grass. Kim Jong-un got military parades. His weapons silos glowed while his citizens' lights stayed off. Satellite images tell the story. South Korea shining bright at night like a jewel. North Korea dark but for one glimmer, the palace. And let's not forget propaganda. North Korea weaponizes absurdity until the absurd becomes divine law. Like the claim that Kim Jong-un learned to drive at the age of 3, or that he scored 11 hole-in-ones on his very first golf game. Kim Jong-il claimed he invented the hamburger. Kim Il-sung supposedly altered weather patterns at will. And through sheer repetition, citizens are forced to believe, or at least to pretend. Pretending is survival. Refusal is execution. But where propaganda meets entertainment, North Korea took things further. Kim Jong-il loved Hollywood so much, he abducted an award-winning South Korean film director and actress to build a propaganda film industry. Shin Sang-ok lived years as a kidnapped director, producing films for the regime. And that's not even the wildest kidnapping story. Japanese citizens were plucked off beaches and city streets by North Korean agents to train spies in Japanese language and culture. To imagine being abducted by a dictatorship because they need an unpaid language tutor. Only in Pyongyang, even culture itself became punishment. Imagine being forced to attend the mass games, a physical spectacle where thousands of citizens perform in perfect robotic synchronization for the great leader's glory. Miss a beat? Smile too little. That mistake could cost your family their freedom. These weren't celebrations. They were obedience drills disguised as art. But here's the perversity. While citizens practiced 8 hours a day for mass praise, the leadership held palace feasts and sex parties. The Pleasure Brigade provided officials with sexual slavery, while starvation spread outside the gates. The hypocrisy reeked worse than the gulag ovens, yet the system works, at least for the rulers. The masses become too isolated, too brainwashed, too afraid to revolt. With radios locked to government channels, internet access denied and borders sealed, there's no outside truth to compare. Generational trauma does the rest. Children born today inherit not just poverty, but mental shackles meticulously crafted by 3 generations of the Kim line. The result is almost horrifyingly effective. 3 decades of famine, 60 years of prison camps, 80 years of hereditary dictatorship, and still, the statues stand tall. In fact, they get taller. Citizens are forced to dust them every single day, faces down in fear. Forget bowing to gods. Bowing to the Kim family is non-negotiable. And let's not forget the grotesque luxury gap. Kim Jong-un has Godzilla-sized yachts, underground cinemas, 17 palaces, gourmet feasts and armored trains carrying Bordeaux wine. Imelda Marcos had her shoes. The Kims have a Disneyland of tyranny built entirely on blood money. Their Versailles on steroids lifestyle makes Marie Antoinette look relatable. Meanwhile, half the population is malnourished. Mothers choose which children to feed. Hospitals operate without anesthetics. Try imagining a surgery where the only painkiller is biting down on a stick. That's reality in Kimland. But here's the irony. For all their control and terror, the Kims are terrified themselves. They know history. They know every family dynasty eventually bleeds out. The Borgias poisoned each other into oblivion. The Julio-Claudians ended in flames while Nero sang. The Romanovs had their final photo op in a blood-spattered basement, which means the Kims live inside their own prisons of paranoia. Silos stacked with missiles, entourages packed with bodyguards, lives lived behind armored walls, ruler and prisoner blurred together. So if the dynasty hasn't fallen yet, it may be because they've perfected fear. Or maybe because the world is still too afraid of what collapse would bring. What happens to nuclear silos when a regime rots from inside? Nobody wants to play Russian roulette with that answer. Until then, North Korea stands as global proof that absurdity, brutality, and hypocrisy can mix into a functioning dynasty. Not functioning for the people, but functioning for the rulers perfectly. North Korea isn't just a prison camp with borders, it's also a global cartel. Beneath the family portraits and goose-stepping parades lies a worldwide criminal web stretching across continents. If you think of the state as a mafia clan, then embassies double as safe houses, diplomats as smugglers, and ambassadors as middle managers in the family's darker empire. Let's start with arms. An impoverished country that can barely grow corn somehow produces ballistic missiles on tap. Missiles find their way into the hands of neighbors like Syria or regimes in Africa desperate for firepower. You had cash? The Kims had missiles. Think of it as Cold War eBay. Then there's drugs. State-run factories manufactured meth, not just for domestic suffering, but for foreign export. Diplomats literally shipped narcotics in diplomatic pouches, sort of like Amazon Prime, if Amazon trafficked crystal meth. Every gram smuggled meant more Bordeaux, more caviar, more armored Mercedes imports for the Kim palaces. And as the 21st century rolled on, the family discovered a whole new racket, cybercrime. The Lazarus Group became one of the most feared hacker armies in the world. They didn't just deface websites, they robbed banks, drained cryptocurrency exchanges, and held corporations hostage. In 2022 alone, they stole more than $400 million in digital assets. Picture this absurd reality. A country with virtually no internet access at home runs one of the most dangerous hacker syndicates on Earth. Orwell meets Mr. Robot. Slave labor also fed the Dynasties' accounts. More than 100,000 North Koreans were sent abroad, to Russia, to China, to Africa. Construction workers, miners, anyone who could dig, hammer, or sweat. They got paid peanuts, and most of that wage was siphoned straight into Room 39. For the Kim family, even their people's sweat was a cash crop to be harvested. But the crown jewel wasn't just money, it was control. Because in North Korea, control doesn't mean building bigger prisons. Control means making sure every thought, every whisper, every flicker of doubt bends back to the family. Radios welded shut so they only tune into state broadcasts. Phones restricted, books banned, even hairstyles controlled. Every citizen required to pin Kim badges to their chest. Those portraits in every home, checked during inspections, fall behind on dusting, your family disappears. And so generations grow up believing fantasy is fact. That Kim Il-sung created the universe, that Kim Jong-il invented the hamburger, that Kim Jong-un learned to drive at age 3, that the leaders are so pure they don't even defecate, lies so absurd they'd be comedy if they weren't life or death truth. Smile wide enough during parades, cheer loud enough during mass games, or risk ending up in Camp 22. But all absurdity masks horror. The pleasure brigades kidnapped young girls into systematic sexual slavery for leaders' entertainment. Political prison camps experimented on captives with biological weapons. Executions staged like theater. Entire generations labeled hostile class and locked into doomed lives before they were old enough to understand their crimes. And yet, outside their borders, endless luxury. Kim Jong-un's personal train with its bulletproof walls and rolling wine cellar. 17 palace complexes with indoor ski resorts and tropical water parks, personal zoos holding exotic animals, while millions of citizens eat grass and bark for dinner. His yacht alone could feed 50,000 starving families for a year. His liquor budget dwarfs healthcare spending. In Pyongyang, the palace lights always glow, even as satellites show the rest of the country vanishing into black. A Versailles built on bones. So how do they still exist? Sanctions. They've weathered them. Isolation. They wear it proudly. Famine. They weaponize it. International scandal. They laugh and move on to the next. The Kim dynasty's genius isn't vision or governance. It's survival. They endure because they realize that if you make your country too dangerous to touch, the world will keep its distance. They endure because their people are too starved, too brainwashed, too trapped to resist. And they endure because power in its purest form is always more addictive than alcohol, palaces, or even nuclear weapons. History books are filled with collapsing dynasties, the Romanovs dragged to a basement, the Julio-Claudians undone by madness, the Borgias poisoned by their own game, the Habsburgs cursed by their genetics, the Ottomans undone by fratricidal brilliance, the Duvaliers exiled in shame, the Marcoses drowned in shoes and diamonds. Every dynasty falls eventually, and yet here stand the Kims. 3 generations of brutality, corruption, and absurd propaganda. Millions dead. Dozens of palaces glistening above starving children. Executions set to stadium audiences. A people enslaved to dusting portraits and whispering praise. Their legacy? They proved that fear can be bred like cattle, that worship can be forced, that absurdity can become law. And maybe the most chilling lesson, they proved that a family can starve millions, brainwash entire populations, steal billions, kill anyone who gets in their way, and still get away with it. But don't forget, history is patient. Basements are patient. And karma, well, karma tends to show up when you least expect it. Turns out, karma usually has better aim than an executioner.